The morning light from three different suns streamed through the crystal windows of the Galactic Academy of Interspecies Learning. Students from 12 different worlds shuffled into classroom 7 with their usual mix of excitement and nervousness. The room buzzed with the sounds of alien languages as beings settled into seats that automatically adjusted to their unique body shapes. Professor Zeleth stood at the front of the class, her four thin arms moving gracefully as she organized her teaching materials. Her large compound eyes reflected the light in rainbow patterns, and her green skin had the smooth texture that all Mantari people possessed. She was known throughout the academy as one of the best teachers, patient with students who came from worlds so different from each other. The classroom held an interesting mix of young beings. Near the front sat Kira, whose blue skin glistened slightly as water droplets formed naturally on her arms. Her people, the Aquarians, lived in perfect underwater cities where temperature never changed and storms never came. She wore a special breathing mask that kept her gills moist in the dry academy air. Behind her, Vex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His red and black scales clicked softly against the chair as he moved. The Drachneri came from a world of active volcanoes and extreme heat, which made them tough by galactic standards. Still, even Vex wore protective gear when studying dangerous subjects. In the middle row, Nira sat perfectly still, her green, plant-like skin absorbing the artificial sunlight from the classroom's special bulbs. Her people, the Verdanians, had never needed to hunt or fight for food. They simply stood in sunlight and grew their nutrients naturally. The concept of danger was almost unknown to them. Chun occupied a corner seat, his cybernetic parts humming softly as they processed information. The Makani had replaced most of their organic bodies with advanced technology, making them incredibly smart but physically weak. His metal eyes glowed as they recorded everything for later study. Near the back, a group of small furry beings called squeakers chattered constantly to each other in high-pitched voices. Their homeworld had low gravity, making them excellent climbers but poor at handling heavy physical activity. Professor Zeleth called for attention, and the room slowly quieted down. "Students, today we have something special," she announced, her voice carrying the slight musical quality that all Mentari possessed. "We are welcoming a new student to our Advanced Survival Tactics course." The students looked around curiously. New students were rare, especially this far into the term. Most beings started their galactic education at the beginning of cycles, not in the middle. "Our new student comes from a very unusual world," Professor Zeleth continued. "A Class 12 death world called Earth." The reaction was immediate. Kira's blue skin went pale, almost white. Vex's scales stood up on end, a clear sign of alarm among his people. The squeakers stopped chattering and huddled together for protection. Even Chen's cybernetic parts seemed to hum louder as his processors worked to understand this information. Class 12 death worlds were legendary in the galaxy. Most civilized species avoided them completely. These worlds were places where everything seemed designed to kill living beings. The weather changed constantly. Dangerous creatures lived everywhere, and the very ground could shake without warning. Only the most primitive species were thought to survive on such planets. "Professor," Zara spoke up from her perch near the window. Her feathered body was perfectly white, and her people were known for their peaceful nature. "Are you certain this is safe? My people have studied the reports about Class 12 worlds. Nothing intelligent should be able to survive there." Professor Zeleth's compound eyes focused on Zara with gentle patience. "The Galactic Council has approved this student exchange program. Our new classmate has passed all safety requirements and psychological evaluations. I believe having a Deathworlder perspective will help all of you understand survival in ways you never have before." Before anyone could ask more questions, the classroom door opened with a soft hiss. The reinforced entrance was designed to handle beings of various sizes and strengths, but what walked through surprised everyone. Jake Morrison looked completely ordinary. He wore simple clothes that seemed to be made of basic fabric, nothing like the protective suits and armor that most students required. His brown hair was cut short, and his skin had a slightly darker tone that suggested he spent time in natural sunlight. He carried a simple bag over one shoulder and walked with an easy, relaxed stride. The students stared in confusion. This creature looked so normal, so harmless. Where was the thick armor plating that should protect against his world's dangers? Where were the natural weapons that any Deathworld predator should possess? He appeared to be made of soft tissue and thin skin that would tear easily. Jake smiled politely as he looked around the room, showing white teeth that immediately caused several students to lean back in their seats. Those teeth were clearly designed for cutting and tearing, the mark of a creature that ate meat. Among the galactic community, most intelligent species had moved beyond such primitive feeding habits long ago. "Hello, everyone," Jake said, his voice calm and friendly. "I'm Jake Morrison from Earth. I'm really excited to learn with all of you." The way he spoke was almost shocking to the alien students. There was no trace of the aggression they expected from a Deathworlder. His tone was warm and genuinely interested in meeting them. This made him somehow more frightening, not less. Professor Zeleth gestured toward an empty seat in the middle of the classroom. "Please, Student Morrison, make yourself comfortable. We were just about to begin today's lesson." As Jake walked to his seat, the furniture automatically scanned his body and adjusted. The chair reformed itself to match his unusual bipedal structure and the strange way his spine curved. Other students watched this process with fascination, as if trying to understand how such a simple-looking being could possibly be dangerous. Jake sat down and immediately looked around with genuine curiosity. He smiled again at his nearby classmates, apparently unaware that each friendly expression revealed those predator teeth and caused nervous shuffling throughout the room. "I hope I'm not too far behind in the coursework," Jake said to Vex, who was sitting closest to him. "I've read some of the galactic standard texts, but I know Earth's educational system is probably pretty different from what you're used to." Vex's scales had turned a darker shade of red, which among his people indicated serious concern. He managed to nod politely but said nothing. How could he explain that just being in the same room as a Class 12 Deathworlder was considered dangerous by most galactic standards? Professor Zeleth began organizing her teaching materials, but she kept glancing at Jake with obvious scientific interest. She had specifically requested him for her class, because she believed that studying with a Deathworlder would provide her students with perspectives they could never gain otherwise. The survival tactics course was meant to be theoretical for most species, but perhaps having someone who lived survival every day would change that. The other students continued to steal glances at Jake while trying to appear casual. He seemed so relaxed, so comfortable, as if sitting in a room full of alien beings was the most natural thing in the world. This confidence was perhaps the most unsettling thing about him. Any normal being should show some sign of nervousness or caution when surrounded by unfamiliar creatures, but Jake acted like he was completely safe. Kira finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Jake," she said carefully, "what is your home world like?" Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh, Earth is amazing," he said. "We have huge oceans, mountain ranges that stretch for thousands of miles, forests full of incredible wildlife, and deserts that can kill you in a day if you're not careful. The weather changes constantly, which keeps things interesting." The casual way he mentioned death-dealing environments made several students uncomfortable. To Jake, deadly deserts were simply interesting, not terrifying obstacles to survival. "The wildlife?" Sean asked with his mechanical precision. "Is it dangerous?" "Some of it," Jake shrugged. "We have large predators like bears and big cats, venomous snakes, sharks in the oceans, that kind of thing. But most animals leave you alone if you know what you're doing and respect their space." The idea that multiple apex predators shared the same world seemed impossible to the alien students. Their homeworlds typically had carefully controlled ecosystems with few dangerous creatures. Professor Zeleth decided it was time to begin the lesson properly. She had a feeling that today's class would be more educational than she had originally planned. Professor Zeleth activated the classroom's holographic display system with a graceful wave of her upper arms. The air in front of the students shimmered and formed into three-dimensional images that seemed to float in space. Her compound eyes reflected the changing lights as she began the day's lesson. Today we will study one of the most fascinating theoretical concepts in survival science, she announced, her melodic voice carrying easily through the room. We will examine apex predators and their hunting methods from across the galaxy. The holographic display showed a series of creatures from different worlds. Each image rotated slowly, allowing students to see the beings from all angles. There was a crystalline hunter from the quartz worlds that could become nearly invisible by refracting light through its body. Another creature looked like a living shadow that could move through solid rock on its home planet. Kira leaned forward. In her seat, her blue skin reflecting the holographic lights. On her world, the closest thing to a predator was a small fish that ate underwater plants. The concept of creatures that actively hunted and killed other beings for food was both fascinating and horrifying to her. Each of these creatures, Professor Zeleth continued, represents millions of years of evolution perfecting the art of hunting. They have developed specialized tools, enhanced senses, and unique strategies to capture their prey. Vex nodded approvingly as he watched a large reptilian creature that breathed superheated gas to stun its victims. His own people had evolved on a volcanic world, so extreme temperatures seemed natural to him. Still, even the Draknari had moved beyond hunting for survival centuries ago. The holographic display shifted to show hunting behaviors. Students watched as the shadow creature stalked through rocky terrain, moving with patience and precision. Another predator used camouflage to blend perfectly with its surroundings before striking with lightning speed. Notice the common elements, Professor Zeleth pointed out. Superior physical abilities, specialized sensory organs, and most importantly, energy-efficient hunting methods. Evolution tends to favor creatures that can capture prey with minimal energy expenditure. Chun's cybernetic eyes recorded every detail while his processors analyzed the hunting patterns. The Makani had replaced their biological heritage with technology long ago, but they maintained extensive databases about organic life forms. Professor, he said in his precise mechanical voice, these hunting methods all seem to rely on advantages, like stealth, speed, or environmental manipulation. Is there no record of pursuit-based hunting? An excellent question, Student Chun, Professor Zeleth replied, manipulating the display to show new images. There are indeed some examples of pursuit hunters, but they are quite rare and generally considered less evolved strategies. The new holographic creatures were built for speed and endurance rather than stealth or special abilities. They had powerful legs, efficient breathing systems, and streamlined bodies designed for running. However, even these examples looked primitive compared to the more sophisticated hunters they had seen before. Pursuit hunting requires enormous amounts of energy, Professor Zeleth explained. A predator must maintain high-speed movement for extended periods while the prey attempts to escape. Most intelligent species consider this a wasteful and unnecessarily cruel method. Mira spoke up from her position near the artificial sunlight. Her plant-like nature made the whole concept of hunting difficult for her to understand, but she was genuinely curious. Professor, what is the longest recorded pursuit hunt? Based on fossil evidence and computer modeling, Professor Zeleth said, we believe some extinct species may have been capable of pursuit hunts lasting up to 2 hours. However, this is considered the absolute theoretical maximum for any organic being. Jake shifted slightly in his seat but remained quiet. He was thinking about the hunting trips he had taken with his father in the mountains back home. Some of those had lasted most of a day, tracking deer through difficult terrain until they finally got close enough for a clean shot. He had always thought of it as a normal part of life, not some theoretical impossibility. The holographic display changed again, this time showing a computer simulation of what Professor Zeleth called persistence hunting. The virtual environment looked harsh and demanding, with rocky terrain, extreme temperatures, and limited water sources. This simulation represents one of the most demanding hunting scenarios possible, she explained. Theoretical persistence. Hunting, where a predator pursues prey over vast distances until the target collapses from exhaustion. The simulated predator began chasing its prey across the hostile landscape. The prey animal was fast and agile, quickly putting distance between itself and its pursuer. However, the predator maintained a steady pace, neither gaining nor losing ground significantly. As you can see, Professor Zeleth continued, this method would require incredible stamina, perfect temperature regulation, and mental focus that borders on the impossible. The energy costs alone would be prohibitive for any known species. Zara ruffled her white feathers nervously as she watched the simulation. It seems so unnecessarily violent, she said. Why would any creature evolve such aggressive hunting methods when cooperation and peaceful coexistence are clearly more efficient? Remember, Professor Zeleth said gently, this is purely theoretical. Archaeological evidence suggests that some primitive species may have used these methods, but no modern civilization has ever been observed practicing such techniques. The simulation continued running, showing the virtual predator maintaining its relentless pace while the prey animal began to show signs of exhaustion. After about an hour of simulated time, both creatures appeared to be reaching their limits. Current galactic biology indicates that this type of hunt would be impossible for any sentient species, Professor Zeleth explained. The thermal regulation requirements alone would cause system failure in most organic beings after 30 to 40 minutes of sustained pursuit. Jake found himself getting more uncomfortable as the lesson continued. Everything the professor was describing as impossible was actually quite normal for humans. He remembered reading about persistence hunting in his anthropology classes back on Earth. It was one of the techniques that had helped early humans survive and spread across the planet. The mental focus required would also be extraordinary. Professor Zeleth added, a persistence hunter would need to maintain concentration for hours while enduring physical exhaustion, thermal stress, and the psychological pressure of a potentially unsuccessful hunt. Vex leaned back in his chair, his scales shifting to a more relaxed pattern. It certainly sounds like something only a very primitive species would attempt. Modern beings have much more efficient ways to obtain nutrition. Exactly right, Student Vex, Professor Zeleth agreed. Civilized species have moved beyond such crude survival methods. We use technology, agriculture, and sustainable resource management instead of exhausting ourselves in pointless physical pursuits. The squeakers chittered among themselves, discussing the simulation in their high-pitched language. To them, the idea of running for more than a few minutes seemed completely impossible. Their low-gravity homeworld had made them excellent climbers but poor runners. Professor, Kira asked, are there any modern species that still possess the theoretical capabilities for this type of hunting? None that we know of, Professor Zeleth replied confidently. The combination of traits required endurance, thermal regulation, mental focus, and the willingness to expend such enormous amounts of energy simply does not exist in any cataloged intelligent species. Jake realized that he was probably going to have to speak up. Everything the professor was teaching was fascinating, but it was also completely wrong about human capabilities. He had personally done things that she was claiming were theoretically impossible. The closest we have seen, Professor Zeleth continued, are some species from Class 9 and Class 10 worlds that can maintain moderate activity for extended periods. However, even these hardy species cannot approach the demands of true persistence. Hunting, Chun's processors were running calculations based on the lecture material. If such hunting were possible, he said, what would be the minimum requirements for a species to develop these capabilities? Excellent analytical thinking, Student Chun, Professor Zeleth praised. A species would need incredibly efficient cardiovascular and respiratory systems, advanced sweat-based cooling, perfect stride mechanics, and perhaps most importantly, a psychological makeup that could endure extreme discomfort for extended periods. Jake almost laughed at that description, which sounded like a perfectly normal human being. Every weekend runner back on Earth had those exact capabilities? Furthermore, Professor Zeleth added, such a species would need to evolve on a world That actually required these extreme survival capabilities. They would need constant environmental pressure that favored endurance over other survival strategies. The holographic simulation finally ended with both the predator and prey collapsing from exhaustion. Neither had successfully completed the hunt, which Professor Zeleth used to illustrate her point about the impracticality of persistence hunting. As you can see, she concluded, even our most optimistic computer models suggest that persistence hunting is simply not viable. The silence in the classroom stretched on like a living thing. Every alien student sat frozen in their seats, staring at Jake with expressions that ranged from complete disbelief to barely controlled panic. Professor Zeleth's forearms had stopped moving entirely, and her compound eyes remained fixed on the human student with an intensity that made the air itself seem heavy. Jake looked around the room, slowly realizing that his simple statement had caused something much bigger than he expected. He had just told a classroom full of advanced alien students that humans regularly did something they considered scientifically impossible. The weight of their stares was making him uncomfortable, but he could not take back what he had said. Student Morrison, Professor Zeleth said very slowly, her musical voice carrying a note of careful caution. Please clarify what you mean when you say humans use persistence hunting. Jake shifted in his seat, aware that every word he spoke was being analyzed by beings whose entire understanding of biology was apparently different from human reality. Well, it's not super common in cities or anything, he began, trying to sound casual. But in rural areas, especially in places like Montana or Alaska, some people still hunt deer and elk by tracking them over long distances. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Vex shot to his feet, his red and black scales flashing to bright orange, which Jake had learned was the Drachnary equivalent of shouting. That is completely impossible, Vex declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who considered himself an expert on physical capabilities. Our best biologists have calculated the energy requirements for persistence hunting. No organic being could run continuously for the 6 to 8 hours that would be required. Kira's blue skin had gone so pale it was almost transparent. Her breathing apparatus was working harder, creating small bubbles in the water that kept her gills functioning. The thermal regulation alone would kill any creature, she added in a whisper. Even Drachnary, who come from one of the harshest worlds we know, cannot maintain body temperature during extended physical activity. Chiung's cybernetic components were humming louder than usual as his processors worked to understand what Jake was claiming. Student Morrison, he said with mechanical precision, are you suggesting that humans can run for multiple hours without stopping? Because that would contradict everything we know about organic energy systems. Jake nodded, still not fully grasping why this was such a big deal to them. Yeah, it's not easy, but humans are pretty good at running long distances. We evolved for it. He paused, looking at their shocked faces. I ran cross-country in high school. Our practices were usually about 2 hours of continuous running, and that was just training for kids. The squeakers had stopped their constant chattering entirely and were huddled together in what appeared to be a defensive formation. Their large eyes were fixed on Jake as if he might suddenly transform into something dangerous. To them, a creature that could run for hours seemed like the most terrifying predator imaginable. Nira, the plant-like Verdanian, spoke up in a voice that trembled with genuine fear. Student Morrison, you are saying that your species' children engage in activities that we consider physically impossible for adult members of the strongest known races? Well, when you put it like that, it sounds pretty intense, Jake admitted. But really, it's just normal exercise. My little sister runs track and she's only 14. Last month, she ran a half marathon in under 2 hours. Professor Zeleth had been taking detailed notes throughout this exchange, her scientific curiosity beginning to overcome her initial shock. Student Morrison, exactly how long could a typical human maintain continuous running? Jake thought about it seriously. It depends on the person and their training level. Most people could probably jog for an hour or two without too much trouble. Serious runners can go for hours and hours. The marathon world record is just over 2 hours, an ultramarathon. Runners can go for days. Days? Jen repeated, his mechanical voice rising in pitch as his processors struggled with this information. Yeah, there are races where people run for 24 hours straight, or even longer, Jake said. There's this race called the Badwater Ultramarathon, where people run 135 miles through Death Valley in California. That's probably our hottest desert. The classroom erupted in panicked chatter as students tried to process this information. To them, Jake had just described humans casually participating in activities that sounded like elaborate forms of torture. The idea that people would voluntarily run through deadly environments for entertainment was beyond their comprehension. Vex sat back down heavily, his scales now cycling through colors that indicated deep confusion. Morrison, you are claiming that humans engage in these activities voluntarily, for recreation. Some people really enjoy it, Jake said with a shrug. It's peaceful, you get to see beautiful scenery, and there's a sense of accomplishment when you finish a long run. Plus, it keeps you in good shape. Zara, the peaceful aviary, had been listening with growing horror. But why would anyone want to put themselves through such suffering? Surely there are easier ways to maintain physical health. Jake realized that. He was not explaining this well. To him, running was one of the most natural things in the world. But to these aliens it sounded like voluntary self-destruction. It's not really suffering, he tried to explain. I mean, it's challenging, but humans actually enjoy physical challenges. It makes us feel good. Professor Zelef had been quietly running calculations in her head while listening to this exchange. The implications of what Jake was describing were staggering. If humans could actually do what he claimed, it would revolutionize everything the galaxy understood about biological limitations. Student Morrison, she said carefully, would you be willing to demonstrate these capabilities? Obviously we cannot ask you to hunt actual prey, but we have simulation facilities that could test your claims under controlled conditions. Jake felt a flutter of nervousness for the first time since the conversation began. He was starting to understand that this was much more serious than he had initially thought. I guess so, he said slowly. What kind of demonstration did you have in mind? We have a holographic simulation chamber, Professor Zelef explained. It can create virtual environments and scenarios for testing survival skills. We could program it to replicate the persistence hunting simulation one showed the class earlier. The other students leaned forward with morbid fascination. They were terrified by what Jake was claiming, but they also could not resist the opportunity to see if a human could actually accomplish the impossible. The simulation is designed to be challenging even for our strongest students, Chun added. It incorporates realistic physics, environmental hazards, and prey behavior based on actual biological data from across the galaxy. Vex's scales had settled into a pattern that indicated intense curiosity mixed with skepticism. No student has ever successfully completed the persistence hunting program, he said. The current record for time before exhaustion is 47 minutes, set by a Drachnary exchange student 3 years ago. Jake nodded, though privately he was thinking that 47 minutes was barely a warm-up by human standards. That sounds reasonable, he said. When would you want to do this? Professor Zelef looked around the classroom at her students' eager faces. This was clearly the most engaged they had been all semester, even if their engagement was driven by a mixture of scientific curiosity and primal fear. We could arrange a demonstration for tomorrow, she said. That would give us time to prepare the simulation chamber and ensure all safety protocols are in place. Safety protocols? Jake asked, confused. Well, Professor Zelef said delicately, if you are correct about human capabilities, then you represent a level of physical prowess that is unprecedented in galactic records. We want to make sure we can monitor your vital signs and intervene if necessary. Kira spoke up hesitantly. Student Morrison, are you certain you want to attempt this? The simulation is designed to push subjects to their absolute limits. Even if your species is more capable than ours, there could still be significant risk. Jake appreciated her concern, but he was confident in his abilities. I'll be fine, he said. I've done much longer runs in much worse conditions back home. This actually sounds kind of fun. the casual way he described a potentially life-threatening challenge as fun sent another wave of nervous energy through the classroom. To these aliens, Jake's attitude suggested either incredible courage or complete lack of understanding about the dangers involved. Very well, Professor Zeleth decided. Tomorrow we will conduct a practical demonstration of human persistence. Hunting capabilities? This will be a historic moment for interspecies biological research. As the class period ended and students began filing out, Jake noticed that they gave him a much wider berth than they had that morning. Word was already spreading through the academy about the human student, who claimed his species could accomplish the impossible. Jake gathered his simple backpack and headed for his next class, unaware that he had just set in motion events that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed humanity. He was simply looking forward to a good run in an interesting new environment. The simulation chamber hummed with energy as technicians made their final preparations. Word had spread throughout the Galactic Academy overnight, and what had started as a simple class demonstration had become the most attended academic event in the institution's history. The observation deck was packed with students, faculty, and even some visiting researchers who had heard about the impossible claims made by the human student. Jake stood in the preparation area, stretching his legs and doing simple warm-up exercises that looked casual but made the watching aliens nervous. He had changed into running shorts and a simple t-shirt, clothing that seemed absurdly inadequate for what he was about to attempt. Where the aliens expected to see protective gear, advanced cooling systems, or at least some kind of technological assistance, there was only soft fabric and exposed skin. Professor Zeleth was surrounded by monitoring equipment, her 4 arms, working efficiently to calibrate sensors that would track every aspect of Jake's performance. She had barely slept the previous night, spending hours reviewing biological data and trying to understand how a human could possibly accomplish what he claimed. "Student Morrison," she called out, "we are almost ready to begin." "Are you certain? You do not require any protective equipment or assistance?" Jake looked up from his stretching routine and smiled. "No thanks, Professor, I'm good to go." The casual confidence in his voice sent a ripple of unease through the observation deck. To the watching aliens, he seemed either incredibly brave or completely unaware of what he was facing. Vex leaned against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, his scales shifting through colors that indicated intense concentration. "Look at him," he said to the students around him. "He shows no signs of pre-hunt stress, no preparation rituals, no psychological preparation for combat. Either humans are completely fearless or they have no understanding of danger." Chun had connected directly to the simulation's computer systems, his cybernetic components allowing him to monitor the program's parameters in real time. "The simulation has been set to maximum difficulty," he announced to the crowd. "Environmental temperature will fluctuate between extreme heat and cold. Terrain will include obstacles and hazards, and the target has been programmed with enhanced speed and endurance compared to standard galactic fauna." Kira watched from her position near the front of the observation deck, her blue skin pale with worry. "I still think this is too dangerous," she said. "Even if humans are more capable than other species, this simulation was designed to be impossible. What if something goes wrong?" In the chamber below, Jake was examining the environment that had materialized around him. The simulation had created a vast alien landscape under a harsh binary star system. The ground was rocky and uneven, with deep valleys and steep hills that would challenge even the most experienced runner. The temperature was already climbing. As the artificial suns reached their peak intensity, "The prey animal will appear when you indicate you are ready," Professor Zelith announced through the chamber's communication system. "Remember, this is purely for scientific observation. There is no shame in stopping when you reach your limits." Jake nodded and took a few experimental steps to test the terrain. The ground felt solid under his feet, and the air had a thin quality that suggested high altitude. It reminded him of training runs in the Rocky Mountains back home. "I'm ready," he called out. The target materialized about 50 meters away. It was a creature unlike anything from Earth, with 4 powerful legs, a sleek body built for speed and obvious adaptations for surviving in harsh environments. The moment it sensed Jake's presence, it bolted with incredible speed, reaching what looked like 40 miles per hour in just a few seconds. The watching aliens expected Jake to sprint after it, to try matching its burst of speed in a futile attempt to catch up. Instead, Jake settled into a steady, rhythmic pace that looked almost relaxed by comparison. His stride was efficient and controlled, his breathing deep and regular, and his expression calm and focused. "What is he doing?" whispered one of the squeakers. "The prey is getting away." But Professor Zeleth was watching her instruments with growing amazement. Jake's heart rate had increased, but not dramatically. His core body temperature was actually beginning to decrease as his body's cooling system activated. Most remarkably, his stride pattern showed perfect biomechanical efficiency. With no wasted motion or energy. The alien creature had stopped after its initial burst of speed, confident that it had escaped the strange bipedal predator. It began grazing on virtual vegetation, occasionally looking back to see if it was still being pursued. When it saw Jake still approaching at that same steady pace, it bolted again. "Impossible," breathed Vex, his scales now shifting to colors that indicated complete bewilderment. "It should be exhausted by now. The thermal load alone should have caused system failure." But Jake continued running with that same mechanical consistency. The artificial suns beat down with punishing intensity, creating surface temperatures that would have sent most galactic species scrambling for shelter. Jake's skin had developed a light sheen of moisture, but he showed no signs of distress or overheating. Hour after hour, the pattern continued. The prey animal would sprint away at maximum speed, confident in its escape, only to find the humans still following at that relentless, unchanging pace. What had started as arrogant confidence in the creature's programming began to shift toward something that looked like confusion and growing panic. "His biomechanics are not changing," Chun reported in amazement. "His cybernetic processors struggling to make sense of the data." 4 hours of continuous movement, and his stride length, cadence, and efficiency remain exactly the same. This should be impossible for any organic system. The alien students pressed against the observation deck windows, watching in fascination and terror as Jake demonstrated capabilities that challenged everything they thought they knew about biology. He never seemed to tire, never showed signs of pain or exhaustion, never broke from that steady, patient pursuit. "Look at the prey," Nira pointed out, her plant-like features trembling with anxiety. The virtual creature was beginning to stumble. Now, its initial bursts of speed becoming shorter and less effective. What had started as easy escapes had become desperate attempts to put distance between itself and the human who never stopped coming. By the 5th hour, the simulation's prey was showing clear signs of exhaustion. Its tongue hung out as it panted heavily, its legs shook with fatigue, and its eyes had developed the wide, panicked look of an animal that had encountered something beyond its understanding. Jake, meanwhile, looked like he could continue forever. His breathing was still controlled and steady, his movements remained fluid and efficient, and his expression showed the calm focus of someone engaged in a familiar activity. To the watching aliens, he appeared to be some kind of organic machine designed specifically for this purpose. "The thermal regulation is what amazes me most," Professor Zeleth murmured, studying her readings. "His core temperature has remained stable despite hours of continuous exertion in extreme heat. His cooling system is more efficient than our best technological solutions." Zara had stopped watching entirely, her peaceful nature unable to cope with the relentless pursuit playing out below. "This is how humans obtained food on their world?" she asked in a horrified whisper. "By chasing creatures until they collapsed from terror and exhaustion?" "Not just food," Jake had mentioned casually the day before. "Sometimes we did it just for fun." The idea that this level of physical and psychological intensity could be considered recreational was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire demonstration for the alien observers. As the 6th hour approached, the simulated prey animal finally collapsed. It lay on the rocky ground, sides heaving as it gasped for breath, completely unable to continue running. It had been pushed beyond the limits of its programming. experiencing something that the simulation's creators had never intended to be possible. Jake slowed to a walk as he approached the exhausted creature, his breathing still controlled, and his movements still fluid. He looked up at the observation deck and smiled, apparently unaware that his casual expression of satisfaction had caused several alien students to back away from the windows in instinctive fear. "That was really good exercise," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's communication system. "The terrain was trickier than what I'm used to back home, but it was a lot of fun." The word fun echoed through the observation deck like a physical blow. Jake had just demonstrated the most terrifying hunting capabilities that any of them had ever witnessed, and he described it as enjoyable recreation. Professor Zeleth's instruments showed that Jake could have continued running for several more hours without significant difficulty. His body showed no signs of approaching exhaustion, no indication that he had pushed himself to his limits. What the watching aliens had just witnessed was not a desperate survival technique performed at the edge of human capabilities. It was a casual demonstration of what humans considered normal physical activity. The silence in the observation deck was deafening as the implications began to sink in. They had not just witnessed the impossible made real. The observation deck remained completely silent as Jake walked out of the simulation chamber, casually toweling off the light sweat from his forehead. 6 hours and 17 minutes of continuous pursuit, and he looked like someone who had just finished a pleasant morning jog. His breathing was already returning to normal, his stride showed no signs of fatigue, and his expression carried the satisfied look of someone who had enjoyed a good workout. Professor Zeleth stared at her instruments in complete bewilderment. Every reading contradicted fundamental principles of galactic biology. Jake's core temperature had remained stable throughout the entire demonstration, regulated by what appeared to be the most efficient organic cooling system ever recorded. His energy expenditure had been perfectly consistent, showing no signs of the metabolic breakdown that should have occurred after the first hour. "This is impossible," Chun whispered, his cybernetic processors running calculations that continued to produce results his programming insisted could not be correct. "According to every biological model in our databases, what we just witnessed violates the basic laws of organic energy systems." Vex had gone completely still, his scales locked in a pattern that among his people indicated profound shock. The Drachnari considered themselves the physically strongest species in known space, adapted to survive on worlds of extreme heat and violent geological activity. Yet their best athletes could not have maintained even half of Jake's pace for more than an hour. "Morrison," Vex said slowly, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe or terror, "how long could you have continued running?" Jake looked up from his stretching routine, apparently surprised by the question. "Oh, probably another couple hours at least," he said casually. "I ran a marathon last year in just under 3 hours, and that was pretty much my best possible pace." This felt more like a comfortable long-distance pace. The implications of that statement hit the observation deck like a physical force. If Jake was telling the truth, then what they had just witnessed was not even close to maximum human capabilities. It was the equivalent of a leisurely training run. Kira's blue skin had gone so pale it was almost colorless. "Student Morrison," she said in a voice that trembled with disbelief, "are you saying that you could have run faster for the entire duration?" "Well, yeah," Jake replied, seemingly unaware of the bombshell he was dropping. "If I had needed to catch the prey more quickly, I could have picked up the pace. But persistence hunting is about efficiency, not speed. You want to maintain a pace you can hold for as long as necessary." Professor Zeleth had been furiously taking notes throughout this conversation, her scientific mind struggling to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about biological limitations. "Student Morrison, you mentioned that other humans engage in even more demanding activities?" Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, sure, there are people way better at this than me. My friend Lisa back home could probably have caught that prey in half the time. And there are ultramarathon runners who make my abilities look pretty ordinary." The Squeakers had clustered together in what appeared to be a protective huddle, their large eyes fixed on Jake as if he might suddenly decide to chase them for entertainment. The idea that there were humans even more capable than what they had just witnessed was beyond their ability to comprehend. "Student Morrison," Professor Zeloth said carefully, "what you have just demonstrated represents capabilities that exceed our theoretical models for organic life. If other humans possess even greater abilities, then we need to completely reconsider our understanding of Deathworld evolution." Jake looked confused by all the attention his simple demonstration had generated. "It's really not that unusual," he said. "Most humans can run for extended periods if they're in decent shape. It's just something our bodies evolved to do." Nira spoke up from her position near the back of the group, her plant-like features still trembling from what she had witnessed. "Jake, on your world, do all humans possess these capabilities?" "To some degree," Jake said with a shrug. "Obviously. People have different fitness levels and abilities, but yeah, humans are generally pretty good at endurance activities. We used to be nomadic hunters who covered huge distances following herds of animals." Hyun's mechanical voice carried a note of something approaching panic as he processed this information. "You are describing an entire species of persistence predators who developed intelligence, while retaining their hunting capabilities." Jake was beginning to understand that his casual demonstration had revealed something significant about humanity that the galactic community was not prepared to handle. The way the alien students were looking at him had shifted from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "We're not really predators anymore," he said, trying to reassure them. "Most humans get their food from stores and restaurants. Hunting is just a hobby for some people, and running is mainly exercise and recreation." But his attempt at reassurance only seemed to make things worse. Zara, the peaceful aviary, had backed as far away from Jake as the observation deck would. You mean humans engage in these activities voluntarily? For enjoyment? Some people really love running, Jake confirmed. There are thousands of marathons and ultramarathons held every year. People travel from all over the world to participate in them. The concept of an entire species that considered persistence hunting to be recreational entertainment was, perhaps, the most terrifying thing the alien students had ever encountered. It suggested a level of physical and psychological capability that was completely outside their understanding of intelligent life. Professor Zeloth was reviewing her data recordings, trying to make sense of measurements that defied explanation. "Student Morrison, your thermal regulation system appears to be more efficient than our best technological cooling solutions. Your biomechanical efficiency is beyond what our computer models suggest is possible for organic systems. And your psychological ability to maintain focus during extreme physical stress is unprecedented in galactic records." Jake scratched his head, looking genuinely puzzled by all the scientific analysis. "I mean, humans sweat really well and we've got pretty efficient running form. As for the mental part, it's really just about finding a rhythm and sticking with it. It's actually pretty relaxing once you get into the zone." The casual way he described abilities that the galaxy's best scientists considered impossible was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the entire demonstration. Jake was not boasting or trying to impress anyone. He was simply describing normal human capabilities as if they were completely ordinary. Word of the demonstration had already begun spreading throughout the galactic academic community. Research stations across multiple star systems were receiving urgent communications about the human student who had casually accomplished the impossible. Biologists, evolutionary scientists, and military strategists were all demanding access to the data Professor Zeloth had collected. "Professor," Vex said slowly, "if humans are capable of this level of physical performance, what does that mean for our understanding of Deathworld species?" Professor Zeloth looked up from her instruments, her compound eyes reflecting the lights of the observation deck. "I believe it means we have fundamentally misunderstood what Class 12 Deathworlds are capable of producing. We thought they were too hostile to allow for complex evolution, but perhaps they create something else entirely." Jake was getting uncomfortable with all the intense scrutiny and scientific analysis. Look, I'm really just a normal guy from Earth. He said, I'm not some kind of super soldier or genetic experiment. This is just what humans are like. But that statement only made the situation more profound. If Jake Morrison was an ordinary example of his species, then humanity represented a level of biological capability that was completely unprecedented. In galactic civilization, they were not just survivors of a death world, they were the death worlds. Ultimate creation. Sheen's processors were running simulations based on the data they had collected, and the results were staggering. If an average human possesses these capabilities, he said, then Earth may have produced the most physically capable intelligent species in recorded galactic history. The observation deck fell silent again as everyone contemplated the implications. They had come to watch an interesting academic demonstration, but they had witnessed something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed the species from the small blue planet that everyone had dismissed as just another primitive civilization from a hostile world. Jake Morrison had not just stunned everyone with his casual demonstration of impossible capabilities. He had revealed that humans were not merely another interesting alien species to be studied and catalogued. They were something entirely new in galactic civilization, apex persistence predators, who had somehow developed intelligence while retaining all of their terrifying physical abilities. The human Deathworlder had changed everything, and he had done it while making it look easy. As the alien students filed out of the observation deck in stunned silence, Jake packed up his simple gear and prepared to head to his next class. He was already looking forward to tomorrow's lesson, completely unaware that he had just become the most famous student in galactic academic history.